So we're excited to have all of you here, and I'm pleased to introduce your speaker for today, Bill Tessar. Bill is our president and CEO and has over 30 years of mortgage experience. So he's going to be kind of sharing some of his experiences and thoughts with us today. As really the first private lending executive to speak out after COVID-19 hit, today he's going to be sharing industry insights with all of our top real estate investors and valued clients who we have chosen exclusively for this presentation. So before I hand over the mic to Bill, I'd like to go over a couple quick housekeeping items that I believe Gina just posted in the chat group. So please make sure to mute yourselves so we don't hear any dogs or garbage trucks in the background. Also, a recording of today's meetings and kind of a highlights will be available to anyone interested, so you can email me. Everyone should have my email based on the invites that went out on your calendars, or our marketing department, marketing@civicfs.com. We'd be happy to send you over the link. So we would love to hear from you for this discussion today. Please, like I said, any questions that you have, we'll answer at the end, so submit those through the chat box. And finally, this is the first of a series of insights that we'll be doing. So you can also click the link that Gina will be submitting in the chat to sign up for any future industry meetings that we have. So without further ado, I'd like to kick things off and welcome Bill Tessar, our CEO. So Bill, over to you.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, everyone. We started thinking about this Zoom way of communicating as a follow-up to a couple of Zoom office presentations I was invited to, and it just seemed like a really good way to connect with the masses throughout the United States in real time, and do so really at the comforts of most of your own home. So we're doing that today. There's been a number of questions that seems to be the same ones asked over and over from our investors, and so we thought, as we crafted this, being mindful of everyone's calendars, that we would start with those 5, and then I believe at the end, Jack, you're going to open up the opportunity for people to ask questions directly, if in fact I hadn't covered that. Correct?
Correct.
Okay, so let's get started.
Sure. So Bill, it seems like the industry has completely changed overnight. And really the industry that I'm referring to is both real estate and lending. What happened to the private lending space, and how is the industry adapting to the new norm?
So I think the biggest misconception that exists out there in our space today is everyone's comparing this to the credit crisis of 07 to 08. Having lived through that, I can tell you there's very little similarities between the two. As a reminder to any of those that didn't live through it, the lending guidelines back in that time were expanded to some really ridiculous levels. You had 100% financing to loan amounts of $2 million with FICOs under 600 on stated income, and you had a bunch of lower income earning borrowers borrowing significantly higher dollars with the idea that real estate was going to continue to appreciate, and doubling down with cash out seconds and high leveraged firsts. And what happened when that market swung, people checked out, and they checked out really, really quick. And it was really a function of leverage and credit quality. And it exposed the market in a way that we haven't seen, I hadn't seen in the 3 decades I've been in the space. And it was long lasting. It continues in some capacity, believe it or not, to this day. HUD still has over $5 billion of non-performing assets, some attributed to that time period. This was entirely different. This had nothing to do with people's credit, people's ability to repay, the leverage, or the likelihood of performance. It had everything to do with the value of those assets, which was devalued overnight. And so, yeah, there's been, Jack, a lot of fear over, and we'll talk about it later, but over unemployment and health and real estate and recovery. But as it related to lending, loans basically got revalued in a 72-hour period. And most of that paper got cut 12 to 15 points. And so what that means really in kindergarten terms is if you had a loan that was worth 100 cents on the dollar, that same loan was worth 90 cents with absolutely no rhyme or reason. There were no buyers for that paper in the capital markets in Wall Street, none. It went away overnight. And what it did was it caused a whole bunch of lenders in our space to scammer and rethink what they were doing in our space. And I call it breaking down into three buckets. The first bucket, we'll call them the posers. Those were people that were highly leveraged, low liquidity in their business, and couldn't meet the calls that were associated with those loans being devalued. Those companies are no longer in the space. And if for the investors on this call, you've been in the business for a period of time, you know who those lenders are. And then there are those lenders that right now are on either some form of temporary pause. They've had a pullback in their personnel from 20 to 80% while they figure out their next move on a plethora of loans that they have on their warehouse line that they can't move. And then the last bucket is the people such as Civic, which were properly capitalized, properly diversified, and thought through maybe some forward commitments, which didn't expose us to this drop in market value. And yeah, it caused us to pivot because new loans we're doing today aren't worth the same loans we were doing yesterday. So you've seen an increase in rates. You've seen a reduction in leverage. You've seen some nuances inside the guidelines that are different. All of those are a byproduct of what you could sell the loan for. That's it. We don't sit in a round table and go, how could we jam the investor? The reality is we get feedback in the capital markets over what a loan that looks a certain way will sell for. And based on those characteristics, we go to the marketplace. And I think what you're seeing is a lot of that change, and it's created a lot of chaos, Jack.
Well, so you kind of alluded to Wall Street and what impact this has to lenders, but can you shed a little bit more light on kind of the connection to extending credit to lenders and what that means to a borrower?
Yeah, so really, all these business purpose lenders get their funds a variety of different ways, most of which is through warehouse or repo lines, warehouse lines. And what they do is they use those monies and then they match those warehouse lines with some advance rate differential. So for example, if you had a warehouse line with Citibank, if we had a warehouse line with Citibank and they advanced 80 cents of the dollar of the loan, we would have to put 20 cents of that dollar in. So on $1 million loan, Jack, they put up 800,000, we put up 200,000. And then that loan goes on the warehouse line, and you either sell that loan as a pass-through, which means at a rate higher than what you, at a rate lower than what you lent at, or you can aggregate that and you could go through a securitization, or you could sell that loan at a premium. All of that stopped overnight. And so people were left with what's in their warehouse lines. And so to answer your question about when's Wall Street coming back, Wall Street's already back. While they're gutting all of the other lenders that have their warehouse lines full of pre-pandemic loans, they're also thinking about their next moves. And I believe that you don't see all of those guys coming back into the marketplace until they can get through a couple $2 billion in paper. I was on 2 calls today with 2 of the biggest investors in the space, which is Blackstone and Credit Suisse, both of which are long-term bullish, but short-term there's a lot of caution from both those entities, and I think that's consistent throughout the space. Today, Jack, these Wall Street firms have requirements that require more cash from lenders like us in each one of these trades. A trade would be a loan that we give to an investor. So they have higher advance rates. The margins are higher, so what we borrow money for is more expensive. These are, for the most part, non-mark-to-market facilities, which means you don't have the risk associated with what just took place in the marketplace, yet you're paying a higher cost. And I don't think that comes back in any shape, form, or fashion till like the end of the year, which is, 2 to 4 months of getting rid of that old paper before they'll get an appetite for the new stuff.
So if I'm putting myself in a borrower's shoes, or if I'm a borrower, you're saying that there's fewer choices because there's fewer lenders that are able to lend right now, and that the cost of capital, because that's higher, it's inevitably being delivered to the consumer as well. So those are kind of the bifold of what the market looks like right now, and you think that may start changing into the new year, beginning of the new year.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you compared February to November, it will still look radically different in terms of the landscape. I think some of the lenders that are gone, and I don't believe they're coming back. And some of the lenders that are hanging on by a thread or trying to figure out new, capital partners may reemerge, but they're going to reemerge differently. And then I think a couple of the bigger players will thrive as opposed to surviving. But no matter what, I still think the cost of capital and leverages won't rebound back as quick as they took it from us. It's been kind of a slow deterioration, Jack, of LTVs and rate and fees. And I think that it's going to take some time before that works its place back into the market. So I think as a borrower, there's less lenders, rates are generally higher, and leverages are lower across the board, because the loans don't have a place to be sold as an alternative, right? And we've seen leverages from some of our competition go as high as 90%. I could promise you those pools, probably traded in the low to mid 80s, which means there were for every $100 million of loan portfolio, those people lost $15 million overnight.
It's incredible, staggering numbers. I know, Bill, you're an investor yourself, and you've been in part of the industry for so long. What are some of the opportunities that you're seeing for both fix and flip and rental in today's market?
So I subscribe to, I think, 11 different publications that feed real-time information to me every morning. And I haven't seen anything, other than if you turn on the news, I haven't seen anything in these publications that are telling me that we're going into this huge depreciating market with real estate. It's been actually the opposite, right? And so I think you have a bunch of iBuyers in the world, the Open Doors, and Redfin had gone in, and Zillow, and a bunch of the biggies have a backlog of properties. I think you're going to see some of that stuff come through the marketplace. Jack, you guys started a warehouse program here through any REOs that either us or our parent company Wedgwood picks up. And so I think there are opportunities through those veins. But I do believe sellers which have dinged up real estate and don't have the capital to put back into the real estate, those are the people that are going to the iBuyers. I think, the good old fashioned marketing, door knocking, flyers, FedEx letters to those people. I think there's some real equity opportunities in there. And I'll tell you, if none of you know this, our parent company, Wedgwood, has purchased, fixed up, and flipped over 40,000 properties all throughout the United States. They have real market reference over the 3 decades that they've been doing this. And, the feedback I'm getting is the buy opportunities are as good as they've seen in a long, long time. They're just not buying them at the courthouse steps because most of those are shut down for now. So they're buying them through the same veins that we're talking about right here, right? Off-market listing, FSBOs, iBuyers. Like I know for a God-given fact, Open Door has got a few thousand properties that they have in backlog that they would like to push. It'd be a good idea to maybe reach out there. There are low CapEx improvements. So there's I think some squish in there and real opportunity. And then ultimately, Jack, what I believe is driving this market to greater heights is you have long-term financing in the 2 to 3% range. So forget for a second the private money that we're talking about here in this forum. talking about when you get your takeout financing or when you fix up your property, the buyer coming in to buy your fix and flip, the financing's the best we've seen in decades. And so if you just go do math on every $300,000. If you could get 3% on $300,000 interest only, that's $9,000 a year. Those deals start cash flowing from a rental perspective. And so I think the low long-term interest rates on the conventional side make the opportunity for buyers coming in to buy the investors fix and flips better than it's ever been. Pandemic or no pandemic, right? We still have a shortage of real estate.
Yeah, that's a good point, and it kind of leads into the next question that you basically just answered. But really, is it a good idea to buy during a pandemic? Situationally, is right now a good time to buy real estate as either for fix and flip purposes or for rental purposes to keep in your portfolio?
So to keep in your portfolio, to get in and get out. That's
Either or, yeah. I suppose either or, and there may be different answers to both of those veins.
I have been long real estate my entire life through all the market, chaos and changes. And I think if you have a long-term approach and you get secure, tight, low interest rate financing on that, there may never be a better time for long-term plays than with what financing is out there today. So on the fix and flip side, I think you just have to get your price range right. What we know is entry-level real estate is trading at 102 to 104% of list price with multiple bids, right? So there seems to be safety in that space. The first move up on the homes is still trading at 100% plus of list price. I think where you start getting the pullback is when you get into the bigger properties, right? Once you start getting into the bigger properties, and we're out here in Manhattan Beach, and I can tell you, I walk the streets on the weekends looking at real estate every single weekend. I'm here local and know it very well. I think that's a 5 to 10% pullback on some of the bigger real, and that market is 1.5 to, forget the 20 million stuff. Call it 1.5 to 7 million is it could be 5 to 10% off in price, and I think that's probably right.
I appreciate that insight, Bill. How does this apply to Civic? What's kind of some of the new things that we have to offer investors? Obviously, this conversation wasn't supposed to be Civic-centric, but it was more kind of insight into the industry. But let's talk about Civic for a moment.
Yeah, I think before I jump into that, Jack, one other thing I would just add off the back of your last question is I think there's no better time than like right now to start getting your team in line. And so when you think about your team, yeah, of course, we want to be on the bench for you. We want to be your bridge lender or your long-term rental lender. But I think you also need a conventional lender on your team. You need a good realtor to source these properties if you're not doing it yourself, and then one to list at maybe a potentially a discount on that. You need to get escrow and title in and on your side. You got to have good contractors if you're not one yourself, potential supply distributors, landscapers, stagers, all these things, when you look at the opportunity to make a proper ROI on your investment or not, make a difference. And so the first thing all of our agents heard across the nation was, oh my God, interest rates went up 200 basis points. Maybe this isn't the right time. But when you think about it, on a $300,000 loan, 2%, $6,000 a year. The opportunity inside the real estate acquisition and then the 6 or 7 different elements of partnership I just shared with you far surpass whatever the cost of capital increase is. And so there is like real opportunity inside of that partnership model that any investor on this call should get their arms around. Additionally, I do think it is important to understand the math. One of the most important characteristics of Wedgwood upstairs is velocity. And so carrying costs count. You want to get in and out of these trades if they are not long-term holds. And if you're wrong about the number, don't fall in love with the old trade. Take your lumps and get out of it, sooner than later. If a deal cash flows and you don't need access to your capital investment, then no one's ever gone broke holding real estate long term. I think that's a good play. I would also just putting a bow on this part of the conversation before we go to Civic is I'd make sure that that you stay connected to the state of the industry like you're doing today. Stay connected to all aspects so you're the one that's driving your car, somebody else isn't. Your question was what's new at Civic and what does it mean for the investor? Is that the question?
Yep.
So, the most important thing is that we continue to lend uninterrupted. And that's a crazy thing. I mean, I believe in the middle of the pandemic, March and April, right in the belly of the beast, we lent over $120 million of business purpose loans. When I could just promise you 75% of our competition lent 0 to something significantly under that number. So uninterrupted lending, I think, is certainly important. Being a well-capitalized firm, there's nothing more frustrating. I've been an investor for 3 decades. To get in a transaction because you got something that's slightly better priced, a little bit lower rate, a little bit lower fee, and that trade goes away before you close escrow. I mean, where our company had an opportunity to thrive is that we close those deals. Leverage has been pulled back across the board. It's probably sitting around 7%. We said 10, but it's really more like 7. And we talked about interest rates being a little bit higher and loans taking a little bit longer to close. If we were 5 to 7 days before, I think it's really more like 7 to 10 days. And if you think about it, Jack, it's, everything is new. You got appraisal insight where borrowers are taking pictures of the inside of the property. We can't get an appraisal in, and you've got doorstop notaries, and you've got e-closings and virtual listings and all kinds of crazy stuff. All that's just taken a little bit more time. So we got our arms around it early, and I think that's a plus. But at the end of the day, if you ask me to put the gold star on my Civic, we have a huge capital commitment to partnership. We've had a capital commitment to partnership beyond lending, which is what we're in business to do everything and anything we can to make our investors successful. So our underwrites aren't an underwrite to say yes or no, you could have the financing. The underwrites are yes or no, that this is a deal that makes sense for you. You're thinking about this the right way. We've looked at thousands of deals. We have a fiduciary responsibility to share that insight to our partnership, our investor, our referral source, and make sure that they're not getting themselves into a situation that's going to backfire or not actually produce the ROI that these guys anticipated. And of course, sharing Home Depot discounts and rehab insight and the opportunities to buy these properties wholesale, all that stuff is just the investment into the partnership, which I think separates us from the masses.
Yeah, that's a good point. And in a way, Civic's really been built in preparation for distress. I mean, we haven't been the most aggressive on leverage out there, but at the same time, Civic's still lending today, and I think that was done strategically, not. And it certainly hurt us there for a couple of years when some lenders are going 100, 100, or 90, 100, and we kind of just had to allow investors to work their way through those lenders and potentially join Civic in the future. So excellent. So as a reminder, if anybody has any questions, please utilize the chat box. I've received a couple of emails, but there is a chat group for anybody to ask some questions to Bill. I've got a pretty good question here for you, Bill, that came in. Have you seen any changes to property values? I know we obviously lend in 15 states, and I'm not sure where this individual is located, but kind of generally as far as the market has seen outside of Manhattan Beach per se.
Yeah, no, I think the entry level stuff, not as much. The bigger property stuff, yes. One way to think about values is under normal appraisal guidelines, we could go inside of 6 months on comps within a 1.5 mile radius. loans that traded 3-4 months ago pre-pandemic, that doesn't really hold a lot of weight, Jack. We're looking at more recent closings, and we're looking at listings which are indicative of that particular area in this particular time. I think that's the real big difference. I don't believe it's just property values across the board have dropped 10%, because I don't believe that's true. I do believe the way that we look at value has changed dramatically, and more emphasis on today, more emphasis on current listings, less emphasis on stuff that happened pre-pandemic. You'd like it to be a little bit closer. Once you start going out, then there's a story, and with more story is more static, and then everyone's writing the cover letters to explain why this property's worth 100 grand more. So I would say overall people were expecting a lot worse. I haven't seen that.
Yeah, I would agree. And it's interesting. I read an article, I think it was on CNBC, that had stated that a lot of sellers that were thinking of listing their property this spring had either taken their property off market or decided not to list it and potentially list it later on, which has created somewhat of a seller's opportunity for those that have listed their properties. Again, and I think in niche pockets like Manhattan Beach, that may not be the case, but I think an overall consensus with a lot of our agents have also agreed with was we're still seeing bidding wars in the middle of a pandemic. They're doing 3D interior modeling of homes so that you can sit on Zillow and go through those properties rather than walk in them yourself, but there's still offers coming in, at least for the time being.
I tell you, if you ever want to know what the smart money thinks, look at the market. So the market was at 27,000 before the pandemic. Fear, uncertainty, all those things stream through. Sellers come to the forefront, and then you got triggers inside of systems that once they hit certain levels, more selling, drops at 18,000. We're at 50 million people unemployed. 100,000 people have died. And you have a market right now that's trading over 25,000. So what it feels like to me as it relates to real estate is almost like a slingshot. Imagine pulling the slingshot all the way back where you can't pull it any further and then letting it go. And that type of velocity is, in my world, what it feels like is coming down the pipe. Does it happen next week, next month? I think, ultimately people are going to have to go back to work. People have to go back to work and feel, and the state's got to start opening up a little bit more, and the curve needs to stay down, and maybe closer to a vaccine and all those things. But the reality is the market is telling all of us that this is not the credit crisis of 2007, 2008. It's just not. Nowhere close.
Got another question for you. As an investor, it's been hard adjusting to higher rates and lower leverage. When do you see this neutralizing for Civic?
Well, so I did a little video that I put out there, and I said that if you go back to the old Ames Home Loan days, way back when, right, when I first started, they had this guy in a boat in a lake, and there were sharks around the boat, and the sharks were supposed to be like hard money guys, and it was like Ames Home Loan to the rescue. Well, Ames Home Loan to the rescue was 13, 14%, 5 points. That was not really much of a rescue. But from that time, where you had a bunch of country club lenders and hard money guys, came the advent of institutional backing. And once Wall Street started sniffing the performance of this paper and the yields on this paper, they started getting involved. And so you had more money to be lent, and consumers, and rightfully so, they ground down the prices, they ground down rates, they increased leverages. It's part of normal market conditions. And that happened for the better part of until we got into February at low and high levels across the board. And then in 72 hours, it was all kind of snatched. I do not believe that we're all going to wake up one Tuesday and rates are going to be back to where they are and leverages are just going to show up. That takes a lot longer because you have to have trades, and then those trades need to have payment performance, and then those payment performance on those trades have to have reference for the marketplace so they can think differently about that paper as it comes through. And so maybe a 10% loan today will be a 9.5 tomorrow because the 10 performed the way it was supposed to, and more people are buying that 10. But what I would do is not ask yourself, when are my rates coming back? It's where can I offset that differential of cost of capital with the other 7 elements of a transaction, and focus on that and then move forward. Because if you're going to wait for rates to come back, you could wait through 4 or 5 rounds of turning properties in the interim. And I don't think it's a wise move. I would say a year plus till we see these levels where we were pre-pandemic, and it'll be a slow bleed to that, Jack.
I think that's a great point. I think that, like you said, there's a lot of areas where you can save money and potentially, save money in excess to the additional costs that you're paying on the debt. We've actually have a question from one of our AEs. So, and this actually applies to some of our investors as well. I've been getting solicited by other lenders in our space that actually do not sell their loans and keep everything in-house. So basically funds, if you will, and thus have not been affected by secondary markets. Any insight on how those guys stack up against the rest of us due to that advantage they seem to promote?
Yeah, I think whoever asked that question, excellent question. So the country club lenders or the fund lenders, for the most part, got sideswiped by all of the bigger firms like us that had strong Wall Street connections and financing vehicles that could transact with lower rates at higher leverages in real time. Those guys that have the funds or the hard money or the individual high net worth individuals that are just trying to get yield have actually, it's been kind of a rebirth for them, because rates are sitting around the levels that they were before the market got taken away. The real big problem is they have limited access to capital. No matter what anyone tells you, no one's sitting around with $1 billion in their Bank of America checking account ready to lend to you at 8 or 9%. They do have access to funds. These funds range from 20 million to a couple $100 million, but even at a couple $100 million with a reasonable size rate, if you're not having these loans pay off, you get backlogged. And what ends up happening, Jack, is not everyone, but a lot of them will put that out there. They'll get their plethora of loan opportunities. They got to pick and choose which ones to go, and then they got to go raise additional capital to backfill whatever that loan request is, given the fact that they don't have unlimited access to capital. But that being said, like, if you were to try to find a silver lining in our industry for the pandemic, I would say that the hard money individuals that have access to individual wealth management or family money, I think they got a shot in the arm. They got to lend in double digits and not be offset by companies like ours that were transacting inside of that. It's a good question.
I know we're coming up on 35 minutes, so I kind of want to respect everyone's time. I've got one more question. Has Civic's cash out refinance policy changed amid COVID?
So the big thing that's changed is, one, we want to know what you're doing with the cash. So sometimes it's best to take a step back. If you looked at 2 transactions, transaction A and transaction B, and transaction A was someone that bought the property for $300,000 10 years ago, and now it's worth $700,000. And let's say when they bought it for 300, they put 60 grand down, they put 20% down, and now they wanted to pay off their $240,000 loan with new financing and pull $250,000 cash out, $200,000 cash out. Now they are no longer capitally committed to that transaction. That at a minimum will raise a question of use of proceeds. Sources and uses are important, right? What generally investors say is, I want to go buy another deal. Just if they don't have a history of buying a bunch of deals, we'll just ask the question, what are you thinking about? Size. We'll also do interest holdbacks, Jack. That's different. Would we do all cash out? We did $1 million all cash out loan against a $4 million property. It was a $3 million property, $1 million all cash out. had the exact same business strategy that they did at Wedgwood, at our parent company. They had a history of doing it. It was a make sense, do that all day, every day. So I do think it's just probably more questions and definitely interest holdbacks if they're pulling out, you know, something that's a little bit more substantial. But other than that, I think it's pretty darn close.
Yeah, I think now is the time to be liquid as an investor. So getting your ducks in line and having that liquidity and the cash available to strike as soon as you find that opportunity is important. So knowing what's available out there is critical. Well, awesome. Thank you so much, BT. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate everyone's time that participated and listened for our first industry insight meeting. This has been fantastic and certainly insightful for me, hopefully for you guys as well. And I certainly look forward to having more of these. So definitely stay tuned. Gina, are we good? I'll kind of just look to you for a thumbs up or thumbs down.
We are all good. The link for anyone to subscribe to Bill's future industry insight meetings is in the chat, and I will be happy to resend that over as well.
Perfect. And if we miss any questions, again, please feel free to shoot me an email. My email is jack.helfrich@civicfs.com, and we'll be able to get back to you very quickly. Thanks again for joining.
Stay safe, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.